I've gotten the inside cylinder cleaned up. The bottom of this thing looks like it was wearing on the inside, because this piece doesn't rotate, so it's fixed to the main cylinder, which is attached to the top. So I'm assuming this is probably the inside bottom where the where the tail wheel sits, or actually it could be the top. That'd probably have the most pressure on it. So that's worn a little bit, but overall this piece is not in terrible condition. The inside of it, it's kind of hard to really see down in there, but the inside of it is rusty, but it's not nearly in the condition of the other piece. This piece sits vertically down into the shaft, so the fact that it was empty or mainly had water in it, it would have only been sitting down here at the bottom part of the cylinder. So I don't think I'm gonna have too much issue with this. The cylinder itself is in pretty good condition, so I'll get over and start finishing up the cleaning of the exterior part. A lot of the stuff out, you can see grooves right here in the very top, right after the threads there. That's where the packing sits, and it looks like it has kind of eaten into the walls of the tube while it's been sitting there. So it's going to be very unlikely that those things are going to seal up very good when I put them back in. You also still see rust and stuff down on the inside wall there. The little piece in the middle is extremely rusty, and then you got rust on the walls, and the piece down at the very end, which is almost impossible to get the camera to focus on, it was full of rust down in there, and I had a long screwdriver digging, trying to get as much of it out as we could. We've got, I think it's about as good as it's going to get without tearing the thing completely apart. So what I'm going to try to do is get it cleaned up good, and get it back over on the table. And I'm thinking about putting a little bit heavier weight oil in it, one to help lubricate it a little bit more than it normally is getting, and also, if it gets water in it, to at least have something sitting in the bottom besides water. But I'm still researching that a little bit. The packing, I'm going to put some graphite string in the end of it here to seal it up for the time being, while I'm researching getting something else going, because this is a I heard from somebody that told me that they think this tail wheel strut was actually used on another type of airplane, and that the Lockheed's not the only one that had it. So I'm gonna research that angle as well and see if that's true. Maybe I can luck up and run across one of these things that's in better shape. But right now, that is where we're at. We've got both pieces cleaned up. I'm about to go grab the spring and clean on it a little bit. But we've got it about as clean as I can hope to get it in there. I put some Scotch-Brite around the top part where the packing sits, but as you can see, it's eaten into it too much to really be able to get that perfectly fixed. So I'm going to look into possible ways to repair it, but at this point, my main goal is to get it back on the airplane. I don't know if you can see it in the video too well, but you can see even the threads for the packing nut. Even the threads have gotten pretty big grooves in them where they've gotten eaten up with corrosion. So it's not a complete failure, but it's not an awesome thing to see. So for round one of a possible fix, we're going to try this 0W16 synthetic motor oil, and hopefully it'll help lubricate the inside of it a little bit more, and not be too thick to run through the orifice to actually work as a shock. And so it's just an experiment. Worst case, it's going to blow the oil out as soon as we try to use it, but it won't be any worse than what it was. So we're just going to give it a shot, and we'll just have to keep experimenting with it until we find something that will work in this thing and not leak. So attempt number one. So step one, we've cleaned the spring as good as we can. So now we're going to push it into the cylinder. So that's the first thing. For round one, we've got our spring in, and now we've got to add the packing to the shaft over here. We're going to try this Palmeta packing 1389 for round one and see how it does. I've got a couple different types of this packing, and just to show what it looks like, it's just a roll of, they call it string, but kind of hard to open with one hand, but it's just a roll of graphite string. The thing calls for, I think, 5 to 6 feet of wrap on here. So this is 5 foot of it. I don't know if it isn't enough. I may end up having to use the other one because I got more of it. But I want to try the 1389 first and see how it goes. We're just wrapping it around, starting up here at the gland nut, and because it gets compressed in between the brass ring and the gland nut to pack it. So we're just wrapping it around to get close to the same thickness. We were about almost 2 inches thick with the other gland nut, and I think we're going to be good with this. All right, stuff. So we have our packing in here. So it's basically going to get packed in between this thing, this brass ring, and it's hard to see, but there's a lip in here that brass ring sits in to keep it from going down any farther. And so the gland nut is actually squeezing between the two of these, so it basically squeezes all this stuff together. So the next thing that I'm going to do, just in an attempt to try to get this thing to seal up, is I'm going to put a little bit of fuel lube, which is a sticky gel stuff. I'm going to put a little bit of fuel lube on the outside of this, and also around this packing nut, on the threads on the packing nut, to try to seal it up, because there's a lot of grooves and stuff in here, not only where the packing goes, but also where the threads are, that could let fluid come back up through it. So I'm just going to see if the fuel lube, it may not do anything at all, but I'm going to see if that might help seal this thing up. All right, so we've got our packing on here, and before I put the fuel lube and stuff, we're going to go ahead and lay this thing up and get it started. So we're lining up our tube and getting it to start going into the cylinder, and then we're going to put the fuel lube around the threads here and on the graphite string, and then we'll start pushing it all together. And I've already started pushing the packing down into the cylinder here, so it just takes a little bit of effort. Let's see if I can. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of fuel lube, and I may not even need to, because there's fuel lube that's coming off the top of those things anyway. So I may be okay to just start screwing this thing in, because I may put a little bit on there just to make sure, but I definitely have fuel lube coming out the sides. What I'm having a hard time with right at the moment though is getting the thing down far enough to, there we go. All right, I'm gonna put just a little bit more fuel lube around the bottom part of the threads just to make sure that I'm covered here, because I don't know if this is gonna work anyway, but I definitely don't want to half-ass it and have it leak, and then I don't know if it was because I half-assed it or because it just didn't work. This fuel lube is kind of magic of sorts. All right, so now we're just gonna start screwing this gland nut in, and hopefully it's gonna bite on the threads at some point here. There we go. So now we'll get the gland, the wrench out, the spanner wrench, and get that thing tightened up back onto the cylinder here. All right, so we got the gland nut back in, we got it packed, we got fuel lube on it. We've got fuel lube around the nut here, the packing nut. So now what we're gonna do is so with no weight on the plane right now, I mean on the strut, this spring basically takes up this whole bottom up to about right here. This piston has gone in and is pushing on the top of the spring, so we're fully extended right now. So we don't want to fill it up with oil in this state, because you got too much room in there for the oil to sit, so you'll end up blowing the top out just because of the fact that you got too much oil in it. So what we're going to do next is we're going to compress this thing as much as we can. It's a pretty big spring in there, but we're going to compress this thing as much as we can so that we can try to not overfill the oil. And the service manual says to do this, you know, with the thing sitting on the tail, but I'm not sure even sitting on the tail is going to compress this thing very much. So we're going to try to see what we can do here, and I'm going to try to keep track of how much oil we put in it so that, you know, we've got some idea of what it takes to fill it up. But right now we got to see what we can do to compress this. All right, I tried to use a strap to put on here and compress this thing, but it's a serious spring in there, and it's going to take a couple people to help me to do that. So I think what I'm going to do instead is just put it back on the airplane and I'll put 400 pounds of sand up on the top of the tail before I actually put any oil in it, and try to compress it as much as I can that way, because I don't see this being a safe exercise to try to compress it with a strap. It's pretty precarious and probably will not result in what I want to have happen. What I did is I put the airplane down a little bit low, got the top piece in, so now, and then jacked it back up so it's hanging, so the wheel's up off the floor. And now what I'm trying to do is to get these guys to line up to go into their respective places. The tolerance on this thing is unbelievable. It's extremely tight, so it's what I'm finding right now is it's hard to get both sides lined up to get them to go in at the same time, so I'm kind of fighting with that. But I think this is probably the easiest way to put it on, because now I'm not having to hold up the weight of the gear to try to get it in there. So we basically put about 400 pounds on the tail, and we got the strut put back on, got the tail cone put back on, the lights wired back up. So we are finished with this up until we find out if our changes actually worked. So one more task down.